Apple Blitz with Anthony Rivardo and Matt O'Leary.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Big Apple Blitz. Matt O'Leary, Anthony Rivardo, hanging out with you. Anthony, how's it going on this Monday morning?
It's going a lot better for Jets fans, I assume, than it is for Giants fans. I mean, yesterday was just another embarrassment for the New York Giants. I mean, I've said that, I think, every Monday for the last 9 Mondays. I've been like, well, it's embarrassing once again. So not really a shocker there, but we got to see your favorite quarterback of all time, Matt. We got to see Tim Boyle step in for the Giants. So here we are.
I told you he was inevitable on Thursday's show. Even I didn't want to put that bad juju out for you. I said before we got started today, no one deserves to watch Tim Boyle play quarterback for their team, but this is what he does. He's inevitable.
He is. And I do have to say, I mean, we talked about it a little bit before we went live. He wasn't awful. Like, he played decently, but still, just the fact that I have to watch Tim Boyle is frustrating enough.
Yes, that it is. We'll start with the Jets. We'll get into the Giants in the second half, talk some Tim Boyle, talk some Shedeur Sanders on the streets of NYC, things you absolutely love to see. But the debate, Anthony, is back. Aaron Rodgers has a strong performance against the Jacksonville Jaguars, second week in a row that he's had a strong performance, 289 yards, 3 touchdowns, no picks, 120 passer rating, 80.1 QBR. And his buddy Davante Adams turned back the clock, 9 catches, 198 yards, and 2 touchdowns against the Jags. Really dominant second half from those two in particular. It's back. I'm not, in a way, I'm surprised. In another way, I'm also not surprised because that's kind of the way that this season's gone. And also, you know, Jet fans kind of want to cling on to any good quarterback play that they can get. But to Rodgers' credit, you know, he has played a lot better the last 2 weeks. So I think it's, you know, worthy to bring up and discuss now at this point. What was your takeaway from Rodgers' performance yesterday and the Jets' first win since Halloween?
Wow, has it really been that long? Man, a lot of winless Monday episodes for us. But I think my reaction to Aaron Rodgers' performance is that he looked a lot more confident, I think, is how I feel about it. Some of the passes that he was throwing in this game yesterday, especially on those back shoulders and those timing routes to Davante Adams, it looked like they were coming out with a lot more confidence and a lot more timing, a lot better timing than they had over the past 2 months, really. Just felt like he was in more of a rhythm and in more of a groove coming off of a good performance last week. I think what he really needed was to just kind of get that one down, get a decent performance in, and then he could start to string them along and gain some confidence and consistency back. That's really what I think Rodgers has been missing, is that consistency. All season long, he's been consistently inconsistent, but now 2 weeks in a row, he's put together some good performances, and I have a feeling he's probably going to continue that trend and finish the season strong now that he's finally in a groove. You know, there is a lot to be said about the fact that he's 40 years old and he had a significant, devastating injury last year. We knew that it would take him time to knock off the rust. Perhaps it just took a lot longer than we expected, and maybe it's finally starting to knock off. But that's really my takeaway, confidence. He looks like he knew where Davante Adams was going to be, when to get the ball out, and how he was going to layer that throw to the location nearly every single passing attempt, which we haven't seen from him throughout this season. So confidence would be my key takeaway.
Yeah, I think confidence definitely plays a factor in this one. I think, to me, he's looked significantly healthier coming out of the bye, and I think that was put on display with his rushing in this game. He was the Jets' leading rusher with 45 rushing yards in this one, averaged 7.5 yards per attempt, wasn't afraid to tuck it down and run when things weren't there. It was also another really strong offensive line day. Olu Fashanu has looked like such a significant upgrade over Tyron Smith. It's not even funny. Which is a really good sign going forward. Like, it looks like the Jets have found their left tackle of the future, which is an important note here. But this, again, like I said, it brought back the discussions on what do the Jets do with Aaron Rodgers. And I think a lot of people were down on the idea of bringing him back a few weeks ago, myself included. I still have my concerns about bringing him back because he is 41 years old. He has suffered injuries each of the last 3 years that has derailed chunks of the season. I know he played through the broken thumb in Green Bay his last year, obviously missed pretty much all of last year. And then this year, for essentially half the season, he was not healthy and not moving all that well. So I have very mixed feelings on it because I think if you do bring him back, you are then running the risk of dealing with this again next year with the inconsistencies due to injury.
I think you're definitely running those risks, but at the same time, there's almost an argument to make where Rodgers has shown enough to at least be a bridge, I think. And I think you can bring him back next year, but you have to have some sort of succession or backup plan, whether that's Jordan Travis, if he really turns it on throughout the summer and starts to mature and develop, and maybe they feel confident in him to eventually take over. That seems unlikely, though, at this point, considering he hasn't practiced at all this year. But I think that the Jets are going to have to make a move at quarterback and probably retain Rodgers. Rodgers could be a nice insurance plan if you can't find that upgrade at quarterback or you can't find that future franchise quarterback. I think you'd be fine rolling into 2025 with Rodgers under center, but you have to have Rodgers under center and some sort of insurance or succession plan. And I believe Tyrod Taylor signed is it a 3-year deal? So he'll be here next year too anyway,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
2-year
he'll
deal?
be here next year.
So that's great in and of itself. Like, you have a backup plan in that case with Tyrod. I think we all like Tyrod. Obviously, I like Tyrod a lot. And, whether I'm eating my words or not, I was advocating for him to take over as the starter just a couple of weeks ago. I think he's a good player to keep, in that backup role. But let's inject some youth into there. I think that you can really roll into 2025 with Rodgers, Tyrod, and probably a rookie drafted, and whether that be a first-round pick, second-round pick, or third-round pick. And I think you can feel pretty comfortable that you have some sort of potential succession plan while you see if Rodgers can turn things around and kind of have the last dance, so to speak.
That's right. And I think even in this game that they won, there was, and I know like the Giants were on at the same time, so I don't know if you saw this, but there was a very questionable coaching decision at the end from Jeff Ulbrich. Now, it didn't seem to matter because Sauce Gardner got his first interception since 2022 yesterday, so that was a nice way to close out that game. But the Jets pick up a first down inside the 5-yard line. I believe it was down. Devontae goes down to the 1-yard line. And there was 1 minute and 5 seconds left. And instead of taking a couple kneel downs and kicking the field goal to win the game 28-25, the Jets give it to Breece Hall. He punches it right in. So the Jets go up 7 and then give the ball back to the Jaguars with 1 minute and change left at that point. Now, again, granted that Mac Jones threw his second interception of the game because he's horrible, and that's what Mac Jones does. But in circumstances where like this game really matters, I was just sitting there scratching my head going, how could you why is that the move? Why are you punching it in? Is it just to say that you scored 30 points for the first time this year? I didn't understand the logic with that one, but it kind of speaks to maybe the broader thing here, which a lot of people are putting the blame on the coaching staff for this season. And now with Rodgers healthy and how he's been playing, kind of passing the blame off of Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to look around it, of passing the blame off of Rodgers. And I'll say, I thought that the decision to punch it in there at the end was really detrimental to my fantasy team going up against Breece Hall. Very upset with that decision, and really upset with the fact that Devontae Adams had such a performance yesterday while I'm facing him in the fantasy football playoffs. Just have to go ahead and throw that out there. I don't know if you have the Rodgers and Devontae Adams duo. It's insane how that was a terrible duo all season long, and then the playoffs roll around for fantasy, and boom, now they decide to spark it up. But I think that you could make an argument, though, and I don't know how strong of an argument it is, but I'll play a little bit of devil's advocate here. Rodgers kind of mentioning, getting to that 30-point threshold and how important that is. What are the analytics on reaching 30 points and winning the game? Well, actually, let me clarify. Would they have been able to run the clock down to 0 and kick a field goal and win? Is that possible?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So then there's really not an argument for me to make here at all.
Yeah, because the Jags didn't have any timeouts left. So the
Oh,
Jets
so
kneeled it down 2 times. Now, Carlson did miss a field goal earlier, but it was from like 40 plus. Like, if you can't trust the guy, and that was his first miss of the year. If you can't trust the guy to hit a 25-yard field goal, then I don't know what we're doing here.
yeah, it's basically an old PAT. So I don't
But
know. I don't really think I have a devil's advocate argument to make actually on second thought. So I don't know. It is definitely a head scratching decision.
it is. It was strange. Again, it worked out, and it was kind of cool that Sauce gets an interception, kind of get the monkey off his back with that one. That's been held over him for a really long time, but Jets find a way to win. And again, like I said, it was mixed. People were upset about the draft positioning and going, well, like now you're gonna fall. And I believe they're picking 8th in the draft now with how things currently stand. But I didn't think my stance on it was I didn't think it was realistic anyway to think that this team was going to lose out from Halloween on. The Jaguars game has been one that I've looked at for a while and thought this is one that they're probably going to win. And honestly, I wouldn't be shocked if they somehow found a way to win against Miami the last week of the year, just because like that team, one is likely isn't going to have anything to play for. And then number 2, they don't usually play well in cold weather, and MetLife Stadium in January isn't, ideal circumstances for them. But even still, if they finish 4-13 or at best 5-12, they're still picking in the top 10 more than likely. And if the next GM is worth anything, he should be able to find someone talented at that spot. It's not like you win this game and now you're dropping down to the 32nd pick in the draft. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I really think the only argument that fans and teams can make for tanking is if they're looking to get a quarterback. And that's almost not even because of the talent of the quarterback, but just because of the competition to acquire one and how much it costs to trade up to draft a quarterback. It doesn't cost nearly as much to trade up 3 spots and go ahead and draft a wide receiver as it does to trade up 3 spots and draft a franchise quarterback. You're talking about maybe an additional second-round pick versus an additional 2 first-round picks. So I really think that's the only argument that you can make in favor of tanking as an NFL fan. And if you're a fan of the Jets, I mean, if you really want to go ahead and tank and draft a quarterback, that's one thing. But I don't really get the sense that this team is looking to draft a quarterback in the first round anyway. I feel like they're more of a team that takes kind of dart throw in round 2 or 3, similar to when the Eagles took Jalen Hurts a few years ago in the second round. They weren't necessarily looking for a franchise quarterback, but they drafted a guy with upside, and now they have a franchise quarterback. That seems to be more of the route that the Jets would end up taking this offseason, especially considering they still have 2 viable starters under contract in 2025. So it's different for a team like the Giants. I think they're a perfect example. They literally do not have a quarterback on their roster under contract in 2025. And even if they did, none of the 4 quarterbacks that they've played this season were going to be a solution in 2025. Now, again, will Rodgers or Tyrod be a solution in 2025? Probably not a solution to all your problems, but can they give you 17 games as a viable starter? Most likely, yes. So I don't think the Jets are necessarily a team that needs to tank and try their damn hardest to move up to the top pick and take a quarterback. They're not in that desperate position right now. And maybe Jets fans will disagree with me, but you don't want to be in that position. It's terrible being in that position, having to be desperate, having to trade up and take a quarterback or lose as many games as possible to take a quarterback. It may not be the best place for Jets fans right now, but it could be a lot worse. And I know Jets fans know that, of course,
Sure.
from the past. So I think that's just kind of where I'm at with the Jets. Like, there's really no point in trying to lose and argue for moving up, because I don't think this team is positioned, or I don't get the sense at least that they feel they're positioned to go ahead and take a quarterback in the first round anyway.
No. And Johnny Boy, we'll get into the chat now. Johnny Boy saying, bring him back. The draft and free agent class is not good, man. And he's looking better. We don't need MVP Rodgers. We need competent Rodgers. He's been that the last couple of weeks. That's for sure. The draft and free agency class is not ideal. And like the best option in free agency is likely Sam Darnold. And I just don't see a world where he decides that he's going to come back to this organization. Now, like, I get it. Joe Douglas isn't here anymore. Robert Saleh isn't here anymore. So maybe things would be different for him, but that would just be a really big surprise. I don't think they would do that. And as you mentioned, I don't think they were ever going to be in a spot to take one of the top two guys in this class in, Shador and Cam Ward. And there's major question marks. Even with those two guys, there's major question marks. But as you get past those two, there's even more questions.
Yeah, I mean, I have a laundry list of questions for guys like Jalen Milroe, Drew Aller. If you want to bring up Jackson Dart, Garrett Nussmeier is going back to school. He was somebody who was intriguing the Giants fans. Like, this quarterback class is not the sure thing that it was last year. Like last year, there was 5 quarterbacks that pretty much every team was comfortable giving a first round grade or projection to. That's not the case this year. So I think for the Jets, while you still have viable options on the roster at quarterback, you can wait for the right quarterback. You don't have to force it. That's the problem with the Giants in the situation that they're in. They have to force one this offseason. Like, they literally do not have a choice but to take a quarterback in the first round unless something drastic happens between now and April. They're going to have to take a quarterback. And in that case, they're probably going to force the quarterback pick because there is a chance that they're not completely sold on the guy that they draft. The Jets don't want to put themselves in that position. Don't force a quarterback upon your roster. Wait until the timing is right while you still have a couple of quality bridge options on your roster. I mean, to be honest, that's a luxury. The fact that the Jets have 2 bridge options under contract to 2025 is really nice. Again, considering teams like the Giants don't even have a single quarterback under contract, the Jets have 2 quality bridge players at the position. That's something to keep in mind and be happy about as you look ahead to a potential maybe 2026 is when you land your next franchise quarterback. Totally possible. Maybe by then somebody shakes free in the trade market. You really never know. But for right now, I think that the Jets need to play it safe and not force anything. Just be patient. When the timing is right, you'll find Aaron Rodgers' successor. But for the time being, I think that you just have to be happy that you have a couple quality bridges.
Tony, the GM, says, same old Jets trying to squeeze into the playoffs one year instead of building for the future. I know that he's got to be down bad this morning because, as you were talking about, I wanted to pull it up. Penn State quarterback Drew Aller will be returning to school in 2025. So no Drew Aller. So that likely means, I guess, Jalen Milroe is quarterback 3. And that doesn't really make me feel great. There's major question marks with him. I love the athleticism. His accuracy scares the crap out of me.
Yeah, and I have to say, I think this is a really good decision for Drew Aller, however you say it. I think with him and Nussmeier, it's a no-brainer. Go back to school, develop for another year, and then you might be going from potential second, third round pick to potential first overall pick. That's exactly what we saw for Cam Ward this past offseason. He declared initially for the 2024 draft. He was a projected 4th, 5th round pick, goes back to school. He might go first overall to the Giants now. So I think that's really the right decision for Nussmeier, for Aller. I think those kids are really, really talented too. And if they turn in another solid campaign in 2025, we could be talking about the 2026 NFL draft class having a quarterback crop that's very similar to what we saw in 2024. And then it'll obviously open up plenty of arguments for the Giants and Giants fans this offseason as we discuss, should we force the quarterback pick or should we maybe trade down stockpile picks and wait for 26? But again, I think that ties in once again to the larger conversation about the Jets and Aaron Rodgers. If you've got those 2 bridge quarterbacks under contract in 2025, no need to tank, no need to force a first-round quarterback pick. You can wait till 2026. Go ahead and take the right guy at the right time. So I think that's really the argument that I'll keep making for the Jets. And it might be the one that I have to end up making in the long run for the Giants if I end up not being sold on taking a quarterback at the top of this class.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And I think, Aller or Lar, however you say it, is going to end up being a first-round pick next year. He might have even been trending that way going into like this year's class. Like, it wouldn't have shocked me if he eventually got up that high. But now you add him in with Arch and some other options, potentially coming out in 2026. Nussmeier, Quinn Ewers might end up going back to school too. Like I've seen some things there. I don't know if he's salvageable. The injuries really run me the wrong way with Ewers on for him in particular, but it feels like any contingency plan that you may have had in the draft is leaving for the Jets, especially Aller, who I think was one of my favorite options for them if they decided to go quarterback over like a Jalen Milroe. But now that that's off the board, I don't know. I don't think they'll be in a spot for Ward or Shador, as we've been kind of saying here. So maybe they do end up deciding to run it back with Aaron Rodgers. And I don't necessarily like, I know Tony was saying that, they're trying to squeeze into the playoffs instead of building for the future. I think they do have some pieces for the future here. Like the 2022 draft class is good, obviously, but the Jets have 4 out of their 5 offensive linemen set, and they're all 27 years old or younger. And I think that's a really good, building piece for a new staff to come in, GM, coach, offensive coordinator, where that you have 4 very reliable players on the offensive line. And truly, I would really think about bringing Morgan Moses back. I know, he's in his mid 30s and he's been a little bit banged up this year, but the difference of the offensive line when Morgan Moses is playing at right tackle and when Olu's at left tackle this year versus whenever like Morgan's been banged up and had to miss either a game or some snaps in a game, and when Tyron was playing left tackle, it's a night and day difference. Like it's been a mostly solid offensive line. I don't get, there's a small narrative going around that the Jets like need to redo their offensive line. Like it's not in a good spot yet. I don't really agree with that. I think it's been mostly fine this year, and they have 4/5 of the offensive line figured out for next season.
Yeah, I think that offensive lines are constantly evolving and you always need to be looking to add depth. But when you've got 4 out of the 5 starters solved, I mean, you're better than probably 60% of the teams in the league. Most of them do not have that. And I know for that from experience, it's been about 10 years of bad offensive line play for the New York Giants. I would trade the Giants and Jets offensive line in a heartbeat if I could. And I would even add some extra talent in the mix there just to acquire that offensive line. Not that I think it would have made much of an impact on the season, because I think that Daniel Jones is terrible regardless of who is protecting him up front. But the Jets do have a solid line. It's a lot better than it was in years past, and it's a lot better than a lot of the other teams across the NFL. So I think if you're looking at 4 out of 5 lockdown, you don't have a lot of work to do until you've got 5 out of 5, or at least, I mean, you can get by. Most NFL teams get by with 3 out of 5 of the offensive linemen being quality. Jets have 4 out of 5. So I think that's something to be really happy about.
Absolutely. So spend a lot of time in the first half of this show discussing the Jets and Aaron Rodgers. I think, over the next few weeks, depending on how he plays, that discussion will continue, but that was a big talking point. So wanted to hit on that one. We got to do it. We got to get into it for the Giants. Your first Tim Boyle experience, your thoughts and reaction to that.
He had a couple really nice throws. I'm not going to lie. Like, he had a hole shot down the left sideline against cover 2 to Malik Neighbors that was really impressive. Threw with a lot of anticipation between 2 defenders. Neighbors didn't even look like he was ready for it, still caught it. That was a hell of a throw. Haven't really seen anything like that from a Giants quarterback all season long. But I mean, generally speaking, overall, it was not exactly a TB12 performance. It was a TB12 and Tim Boyle 12, but not Tom Brady 12. But I think Tim Boyle, listen, it sucks that we have to watch him. It could be worse, though, because we've seen it worse. This was not the worst quarterback performance that we've seen from the Giants all year. At least he gave Neighbors a few chances and Neighbors capitalized on them. But this is just so depressing that we're at the point in the season where the 4th quarterback is starting. His name is Tim Boyle. Things are this bad that we have to watch Tim Boyle close out the year. It's pretty bad.
It's rough. And I like on Thursday, I half jokingly said that he's inevitable, but it's not crazy surprising to see him come in this game. It was a pretty stereotypical stat line from Tim Boyle here. 12 of 24, so 50% completion, 123 yards, 5.1 yards per attempt, a touchdown, a pick, 61.6 rating. Unfortunately, like I've seen it, man. Like with the Jets fans watched this for a few games last year where he started for the Jets. It's not pretty, but if you need a tank commander, which clearly that's what the Giants are, what's happening here, I think just run him out the next 3 weeks, lose 30-10 every week, and just call it a wrap on 2024.
Right. I mean, what else are you going to do? This team is so obviously tanking. I mean, even if they aren't officially trying to lose and tank, like, it doesn't get any worse than this from an NFL roster standpoint. They've placed guys on injured reserve all over the place, key starters. I mean, John Runyon Jr. is now done for the year. Deontay Banks hasn't played in 2 weeks either. There's guys who I'm sure could probably play through these injuries if they had something to play for, but the Giants have nothing to play for. And to the credit of the defense, first quarter yesterday, they fought. Last week against the Saints, they fought. This is just a historically bad offense. And if you open that up into the larger conversation about the Giants and the future and planes flying over the stadium and all that shit,
Ooh, yeah, again.
things are getting worse and worse every single week. Things are getting worse and worse every single year. In 2022, this offense was decent. This team was good enough to make it to the playoffs. 2023, serious regression. The problem is that we're now in the third year of this regime, and they've taken another significant regression towards the bottom of the NFL. And that's where I think you have to have the conversation of a rebuild is supposed to get better each year, not worse each year. The Giants have unbuilt what they built. It's not a rebuild. They've like tore it all down and gotten significantly worse. And that's why I think we're having conversations about this offseason, blowing it all up, cleaning house. Obviously, that's what the plane yesterday said. Mr. Mara, please fire everybody. We're not going to stop this until you do. Thankfully, the Giants only have one more home game, so there's only one more opportunity for a plane to fly overhead. But I really just don't know how you watch a game like yesterday's game and think, yeah, Giants on the right path. Keep the guys you've got in the building. This team just looks like they have no fight, no care, no effort. And I don't know how you can keep a regime that allows that kind of attitude to bubble to the top on a team, stay in place, and continue to build.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. And again, the plane flying around for a second week in a row, like, John Mara sees that. The Giants are very aware what people are saying about them. Hell, even didn't they take a shot at ESPN for being so critical of them a couple weeks ago?
They did, which was embarrassing in its own right, as everything has been for the Giants this season.
Which makes me believe that I don't know how you could justify bringing back the GM and the coach. And again, I'm sorry. I feel like I bring the same thing up every show for the Giants. And maybe it's getting tiresome here, but if they lose out this season and go 2-15, how could you pitch the Giants fans and be like, okay, no, it's going to be fine. We're going to draft the quarterback, first or second overall, and everything's going to be better because we have that quarterback now. I think they need a lot more help than just that.
They need so much more help than that. I mean, you would be talking about a 12-game losing streak to end the year if they do lose out. They have one home game left. They're 0-8 at home. They would be the first team in NFL history to go 0-9 at home since obviously the NFL season expanded to 17 games. They would be the first team to do it. And I don't know how a regime could survive that kind of history, making that historically bad season a reality. How do you survive that? I'm not entirely sure. And I understand, sure, he cleaned up the cap space in some ways. Joe Shane hit on those 2024 draft picks. Regardless, at the end of the day, the roster in 2021 was really bad, but it was better than it is right now. And I think that tells you everything you need to know. I would take that 2021 roster over this 2024 roster pretty much any day of the week. And if that's the way that I'm feeling, considering how critical I was of that team in 2021, that should pretty much tell you everything you need to know about the roster construction under Joe Shane and how mismanaged it has truly been.
Johnny Boy has a question for us, kind of on a little off topic, but kind of on topic here, but I want to bring it up. Why do fans think a first-time head coach can't work? From the Jets side, I just think it's because they've gone that route pretty much every single time, excluding Adam Gase. That was the only coach since Bill Parcells that they hired with any previous head coaching experience. And usually the Jets go with the first-time defensive coordinator as a head coach. So I just think you have a lot of fans who don't want to go through that again. And for me with this team, like I think they need a proven head coach. I'm not really in a spot where I want to see a first-time head coach unless it's coming on the offensive side of the ball. That's my caveat. How about for your Giants?
I mean, I don't have anything I don't necessarily think there's an inherently wrong with having a first-time head coach. The problem is for the Giants, they've gone down that path a couple of times, and they most recently did it with Brian Daboll. First-time head coach steps in. Teams don't know what to expect. He ends up beating them narrowly because he's a pretty decent play caller, a decent coach at the time. But what you see with the first-time head coaches is an inability to really kind of fight through a storm. And what the Giants have had over the last 2 years is an absolute shitstorm. And that's been tough for a rookie head coach now in his third year to manage. Now, if you have a guy who's been through a shitstorm before, they're usually better at getting through the next shitstorm. But again, with rookie head coaches, you usually don't have that kind of skill set kind of baked into them. And for a team that's had a lack of stability and a lack of consistency for a decade now in the Giants, and arguably for the Jets as well, those teams need stability. Former head coaches are the ones that usually bring that. They might not have the high ceiling, like Dable's ceiling was limitless, coming off of, an assistant coach of the year award, or at least nominee with Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills, all the stuff that he did there. His ceiling was, limitless. He really could have transformed the Giants and done something special. But his floor was also a lot lower than it would be for a guy like a Mike Vrabel, who has taken a bad Tennessee Titans roster to an AFC championship game. So I think it's really just an argument of ceiling and floor, as most things in football can ultimately be broken down to. Like if you're talking about the top quarterbacks in the draft class, well, do you like the guy with the higher ceiling or the higher floor? That's usually how those conversations ultimately boil down. Same argument for the head coach. And just because a guy has been a head coach in the past, you feel like the floor is a little bit higher. And you can actually see an example of that with the Giants. When they fired Pat Shurmur after 2 seasons, the team was bad, and you could argue that he was deserving of being fired. But even then, we're not talking about 2-win seasons. We're talking about 5-win seasons got him fired. The floor was still higher. The ceiling wasn't as high with Shurmur. We knew that. So we wanted to take another swing for the fences. Unfortunately, we went with the lowest floor possible in Joe Judge, and things got even worse. But again, it's really just an argument of floor and ceiling. And for former head coaches, or head coach candidates with prior experience, the floor is always higher. And I think for a team that just needs to get okay again because they've been so bad for so long, take the guy with the higher floor.
Yeah, I am with you on that. I think, taking the guy with the higher floor makes sense for honestly both of these teams. Ray and nephew comments, Dable got stuck with Jones. Do you feel that way? Like as a Giants fan, do you feel like Dable got a shitty situation, or does he deserve to get canned with the rest of them?
He deserves to get canned with the rest of them, but I do feel like he got stuck with Jones. I don't feel like Joe Shane got stuck with Jones. Joe Shane had every opportunity to make a decision there, franchise tag him so he could have the flexibility to move on, just not sign him. Joe Shane decided that Daniel Jones was the future of this franchise. Joe Shane made that mistake. I really don't believe that Brian Dable was pushing all the chips into the middle of the table to bet on Daniel Jones. I don't think that he was screaming to Joe Shane, please re-sign Daniel Jones. I need him here. That didn't happen to me. I think Brian Dable absolutely got stuck with Jones. Now, he's done a terrible job managing other portions of this team, which is why he's going to get fired. I also think because he's lost his grip on the locker room, he's going to get fired. So there are other reasons for him to get canned that don't have to do with Daniel Jones. But I don't feel like Dable is the reason Jones stuck around as long as he did. I think that has to be credited to Joe Shane. And that's why I want a new GM, because I think that the one fatal flaw and mistake that he made was signing Daniel Jones to that extension. And I think there has to be consequences for bad actions. He needs to be held accountable for that decision. Even if you like everything else that he did, that was an egregious mistake that is worthy of being fired. And it did ultimately force a quarterback onto the head coach and cost him his job as well. So, if Dable were to get fired and Shane survived, I would find that to be completely irresponsible from ownership, disrespectful towards Dable, and just a misunderstanding of what truly went wrong for this team. So I actually think Dable could be a pretty good coach if he was dealt the right hand of cards. I just think that his GM really threw him under the bus and gave him the shittiest deck of cards in the world.
Yeah, I 1,000% agree with you. I understand that it's just one decision, right? Like the decision to pay Daniel Jones, but I think that's enough to lose your job over. It's the most important position in the sport. And clearly it was an egregious mistake after just, 2022, he had a good year. I don't want to take away from Daniel Jones's season a couple of years ago, but it was an outlier in that we hadn't seen him play at that level before. And since then we hadn't seen him play. So the franchise tag made so much more sense, I think, at the time, and paying him on a long-term extension, I think really ended up costing him, and I think will eventually cost him his job here. And it's hard for me to have sympathy towards him because it was his call at the end of the day to sign up for 2 or 3 more years of Daniel Jones.
Right. And that's complete agreement. Like that was his decision to do that, and he needs to be held accountable. And I also there's this notion from some Giants fans, well, what else were you going to do other than sign Jones? The Giants didn't have a choice. They absolutely had a choice, because that entire offseason, I was screaming, give him the franchise tag and extend Saquon Barkley. And I know I wasn't the only Giants fan. And that's my thing. I get that I'm only a fan and I'm an armchair GM or whatever you want to call me, YouTube, Twitter GM, sure. But it's been way too often over the last few years that the Giants have made moves. And there's been a section of the fan base that's been like, that's a bad decision. Don't do that. And they do it anyway. And that section of the fan base ends up being right. And the front office of the New York Giants ends up being wrong. And I think that tells you everything that you need to know. The fans shouldn't always know best, but lately the fans have known best. And that tells you that the guys in the front office are not running the front office the right way. And that's how I feel about it. So again, the Daniel Jones thing, you can't convince me that Brian Dable was a big advocate for retaining the guy. He never really seemed too thrilled. He seemed like his playbook was always handicapped by Daniel Jones, even in that 2022 season, especially after he was coming off of the torn ACL. The fact that the Giants didn't do everything in the world to acquire a quarterback. And again, I know that people will say, well, they tried to trade up this past April. They tried their best. They just didn't get an offer accepted. They still didn't take a quarterback at any point in the draft. There are 7 rounds of the draft. They should have at least thrown a dart at the board so we could feel like we have something for the future to potentially plan and build around. Even Jerry Reese understood this. He got a lot of shit towards the end of his career with the New York Giants when he was mismanaging the quarterback position with Eli Manning, but at least he was taking chances. Davis Webb was a 3rd-round pick. Kyle Lauletta was a 4th-round pick. Those guys weren't any good, and you could argue that they were wasting mid-round picks, but I actually like that strategy. Throw darts at the board until you get a bullseye. Sometimes you're going to completely miss the board. Other times you're going to get closer to a bullseye than other times. So that's how the Giants should have treated this past offseason. Instead, they just didn't address the quarterback position, added a terrible backup in Drew Lock, and just said, F it, we're running with Daniel Jones versus Drew Lock, basically handing Daniel Jones the job. And so the one egregious error of signing Daniel Jones to that contract isn't the one egregious error because he compounded it with other mistakes in the process to respond, like not drafting a quarterback, like only making Drew Lock at the competition. So there's just been so many mistakes. And when you mismanage that one position so badly, it's one thing to mismanage the O-line, the cornerback room, whatever. But when you mismanage the quarterback position, that pretty much boils down to everything that you need to know about a general manager, how good he is at his job, or how terrible he really is at his job, like Joe Shane's case.
Absolutely. I want to close the show with some potential exciting news and get your take on it. So there was video this week of Shedeur Sanders and Malik Neighbors playing catch in New York City. Are we reading too much into this, or do you think there's a real chance that Shedeur Sanders could end up a New York Giant in a couple of months?
Yeah, so the story behind this was actually reading and writing something about it this morning. It was reported by Ryan Dunleavy of the New York Post. I guess Malik Neighbors and Isaiah Simmons, they're best friends. They're very close in the locker room. They've gotten really close. And for that reason, I think the Giants should extend Isaiah Simmons this offseason just to keep Neighbors happy. I think we're getting to that point, but that's a discussion in a couple months. The two of them were just hanging out in New York City going Christmas shopping. They went to a jewelry store. Shedeur Sanders happened to be in there buying some hardware. So that's where they met up, and then they got to talk and hang out and throw the football around and play some catch in the streets. Now, here's the question that I have. Where did this Giants football come from? Because there's a separate video where Shedeur is in an elevator with his friends, and they're taking a video, and he holds the football up, and it's got a Giants logo on it. So it's a team-issued ball coming from the New York Giants facility. Where did it come from? Did Malik Neighbors and Isaiah Simmons seriously just have that ball on them while going Christmas shopping in New York City? Or did Shedeur Sanders have that ball on him? And if so, how'd he get it? Was he at the Giants facility? Was he meeting with somebody? That's my question mark. So, yeah, and this guy asks the same question. This guy, Jake, who posted the video, did Shedeur visit the team facility? Now, again, it totally could have been that Malik Neighbors was throwing the ball and for some reason had it on him and then gave it to Shedeur. But why? Why would he have that ball on him while he's going Christmas shopping? I'm not entirely convinced that that's normal. So I wonder if there was something going on between the Giants franchise and the Sanders family, if they had some sort of secret behind closed doors meeting that's not going to get reported. It's totally possible, but I think there is a little bit of fire with the smoke, though, so to speak. There's definitely a mutual interest between these two parties, in my opinion.
And Joe Shane has gone to not only multiple Colorado games, but Colorado practices. And
yeah,
that, like, you know, I feel like you don't see that. That's more rare to see that at this point. Like, yeah, you have guys show up to pro days and stuff like that, or, combines, but a practice in the middle of the season, that feels different. I don't know.
Yeah, it does feel different. And I know Brandon Brown has been to a few of those practices as well, the assistant GM of the Giants. Obviously, a few weeks ago, there was an anonymous quote from an NFC East assistant GM, which was so obviously Brandon Brown, completely praising Shedeur Sanders. It's very clear and obvious who the Giants like in this draft, in my opinion. They love Shedeur and they want to draft him. It's just going to be a question of whether or not they're going to have the opportunity to. Will Joe Shane be here in 2025? Will Brandon Brown be here in 2025? If the Giants end up cleaning house, I think all the options are back on the table. They could trade down. They could look ahead to the 2026 draft class, which is now shaping up to be really solid. Or maybe they still could go after the quarterback. But we'll get more clarity on the future and direction of this team once we find out who the general manager is going to be. And as you and I agree, it shouldn't be Joe Shane. And if that's the case, then will they be still targeting Shedeur Sanders? That's going to be a major question mark. So I will say, though, for Shane and for Brown, they're doing the right thing, creating this relationship with Deion Sanders and potentially opening up this rapport with those two parties so that if they are making the pick in April, they can take him and not have to worry about the drama and controversy around making sure that he doesn't go to a specific franchise. I think that this is the right way to make sure that that doesn't become a problem. Just become friends with him, get him real close, make him want to be in New York. I think that's actually a pretty smart strategy. But again, we'll ultimately see who's making that pick and whether or not that's going to come to fruition.
Yeah, I don't think it'll be either Shane or Brown. Like I know some Giants fans are like, well, I like Brown and I want to promote him. I think you'd kind of just get a similar thought process as he's the number 2 guy to Joe Shane. So that wouldn't be what my plan would be. But I could totally see, even if they go a completely different direction and hire someone outside the organization to take over as GM, I would not be surprised if Shedeur Sanders is the pick.
Wouldn't shock me at all. I think he's probably going to go number 1 or number 2. It's just going to be, does he land with Vegas or does he land with the Giants? And Cam Ward's going to go to the other one. I still prefer Cam Ward. I think he's got a hell of an arm, a lot of poise under pressure, and an ability to make plays off script that Sanders doesn't necessarily have. But at the end of the day, you also have to be excited about the fact that Sanders has a Hall of Fame bloodline, and he has been really, really great for 4 seasons now, 2 at Colorado and 2 at Jackson State. So there's a lot to like about both of those guys. Neither one of them to me is Jaden Daniels, Drake May, or even maybe, I don't know, I was really high on McCarthy, but they are talented, and in bad quarterback classes, we've seen absolute superstars rise to the top. And Mahomes was in a bad quarterback class. There's so many examples of it. I mean, even arguably CJ Stroud, Bryce Young class. Stroud is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. Nobody really viewed that as being the best quarterback class, despite 2 guys going near the top. So I think there's an argument to make. You just take the quarterback, and if you get the right pieces around him, any of them can be franchise quarterbacks and any of them can be busts. We'll just have to see which way it goes in the future.
I think we close with this. Rico the Pup has a question for you. With hindsight, would the Giants have been better off drafting the 4th quarterback off the board instead of Malik Neighbors?
In my opinion, yes. And I'm going to clarify, this is not revisionist history for me, because my argument in April was to draft a quarterback no matter what. In my final predictive mock draft, or what I would do mock draft, I even had the Giants trading up to 4 to make sure that they could take JJ McCarthy. That's how serious I was about taking a quarterback. And everybody knows I thought Malik Neighbors, I think I had him as the number 1 player in the draft class. I thought he was spectacular. So the fact that I was willing to pass on the number 1 player, regardless of position in the draft class, to take the quarterback should tell you how I felt about it. I think taking a quarterback would give us an infinitely brighter future going forward. Even if we had JJ McCarthy and he still tore his meniscus and wasn't playing this year, we would feel better about 2025. We'd say, okay, at least we have the quarterback position solved. We have a top pick. Now you get a Travis Hunter and you have your franchise quarterback. So I don't know. Again, I guess it is technically revisionist history, but I think anytime you're picking in the top few picks and quarterback isn't a lock on your roster, you don't pass up the opportunity to take a quarterback. You have to take it when you have the chance.
I'm with you on that one. And you're right. You were saying it at the time. You're a big JJ McCarthy guy, and he was available, but the Giants ended up taking the wide receiver instead. That'll do it for us on this Monday edition of Big Apple Blitz. Follow Anthony over on Fireside Giants. You can find me at Matt O'Leary and NY covering all things Jets. That'll do it. We'll catch you next time.